Thank you. What you have just seen is our video made by our visual designer, Twan, for our Architecture in Space competition. My name is Maarten Smits. I'm the team captain of Space Oasis Delft 3. And over the next hour, we're going to tell you everything about our Martian habitat design. It's called Prometheus. But before we go into detail about how it looks and why it looks the way it looks, I want to tell you about why we actually want to put a base on Mars. I'm going to divide this into two questions. Why Mars and why a base? Mars is a planet that is actually quite unique. It is the only planet that we, with our current technology, can visit and can go to. It takes about 7 months. So let me explain. There are other planets in our solar system as well, but they're all either way too hot, way too toxic, they are very large gas planets, Jupiter, or they're very cold. And if you look outside our solar system, the nearest planet will take us, with our current technology, 6,300 years to get to. So Mars is unique. It is the only planet we can go to. And in addition to this, Mars has water ice on it. And as you all know, that is vital for us humans. So the uniqueness of Mars is already reasonable enough. We want to make us humans an interplanetary species. But Mars can also be useful to us. Mars is a planet. Earth is as well. And both planets have endured the entire history in the galaxy. But how did they evolve? We know not really a lot about the evolution of Earth as a climate. And climate is a big issue now, of course, everyone knows. So how does this relate to Mars? Earth has tectonic plates that shift and that change and that kind of wipe the history of how Earth's past looked like. Mars is the same throughout its billion years history. And research suggests that there might be, or might have been, oceans on Mars. And if they don't have these tectonic plates that shift, and there might have been oceans there, well, how did Mars become the way it is? And if we go there as humans and study how Mars became the way it is, we can learn from that and apply it to Earth to make sure that our Earth stays the way it is. Now, why do we want to build a base there? Why not just go there? With our recent space travels to the moon, what we did is we bought everything, we went there, we took our measurements, and then we went back with everything what we had brought. Due to the distance of Mars, this is not possible. I already said 7 months it takes us to get there, but due to the orbits of Mars and Earth, they need to align, we have to stay there if we go there. Because the window of leaving to Mars only happens every 2 years, something like that. So we go there, we have to stay there. And that is why you need a base first. Prometheus, our design. We are going to talk about the exterior, as I said, why it looks the way it looks. We're going to talk about the shield, which you really need. We're going to talk about the inside as well. And first, we're going to focus on the exterior. Our architect, Mark, I would like to invite you onto the stage, will now tell you everything about the exterior of the habitat. Thank you.
Thank you, Maarten. Okay, so this is our design, this is our habitat. So now, I could talk all day about every little design choice we've made to come up to this end result. But I only have 20 minutes, so I'm going to focus on just one aspect of this whole base, and I'm going to talk you through it, how we're going to design this. This is our interior habitation module. This is the building that houses our astronauts. This is where they live, work, sleep. When we're designing any type of building, we need to ask one question first. How big does it need to be? In the beginning of the year, we did research to figure this out. And we came to the conclusion that we need 1,200 cubic meters of interior volume. This is for all your systems, for all your storage, for research equipment, for living space, etc. Now, as structures, it is our goal to create a building that houses this 1,200 cubic meters of interior volume and protects it against the hostile Martian conditions. Okay, what are those hostile Martian conditions? Well, there are numerous hostile Martian conditions, but today we're going to focus on 3 of them, and we're going to tackle these 3. The atmosphere, the radiation, and the toxic dust. Atmosphere, why is that dangerous? Well, Martian atmosphere has a really low pressure. Mars is kind of like a vacuum chamber. If we would be right there, right now, we would swell up and eventually die. We'd like to prevent that. So, partly because that atmosphere is so thin, also a lot more radiation reaches the surface of the planet. This is also a thing which I have to tackle. And lastly, Mars is covered in deserts of toxic, abrasive dust. Okay, we're going to tackle these 3 challenges. I'm going to focus on creating a pressurized interior atmosphere that is free from any dust. And then later, Pam, our radiation expert, is going to tell you how we're going to tackle radiation. Okay, now, creating a pressurized interior atmosphere kind of makes sense. Everything you put into space or on Mars, you have to make pressurized. Otherwise, we can't live there as humans. But what does this dust actually mean for what we want to build? Well, it means that we can't construct like we would on Earth. On Earth, we would build a building by laying down a foundation, putting up walls, putting up a roof, and then finally closing it off with doors and windows. If we do something like that on Mars, there's this period of time before we close it off where this toxic dust can enter our building. So, therefore, our astronauts would breathe it in, and they would suffer the consequences. So, we have to make something that is closed off when we landed on the planet. Okay, maybe your immediate thought is, let's use something like this. These are basically pressurized aluminum tubes that they use on the ISS. It's a really simple version of what they are. These modules are used on the ISS, so let's try to design our habitat with this. Let's use this left one here, or this right one for you. This is the ISS Tranquility node. It creates an interior volume of 70 cubic meters, and it weighs 19,000 kilograms. If we want to build our habitat out of this, we need about 17 of these. Now, that would weigh up in total to about 326,000 kilograms. Now, let's do a really, really rough estimation. Let's say that it costs $2 million to build and transport 1 kilogram to Mars. That is roughly a price which kind of resembles what has happened in the past. If we do that, our habitat would cost over 652 billion. I don't have it. I don't know, do you have it? No, okay, so we have to reduce the mass. Well, the next thing you might say, okay, let's, instead of using 17 small ones, let's just use one really big one. And because then we don't have all the different walls, we just have one wall, we might have less mass, and therefore we have less money that we need to spend. But then we come to our final problem, and that is that everything that we put in space or on Mars, we have to actually take with us. So it also has to fit inside our rocket. So we are limited by our payload size, which is the part of the rocket which actually transports our stuff that we want. Okay, let's recap. First of all, we can't construct like we do on Earth. Second of all, we have to minimize the weight because it costs astronomical amounts to actually transport it. And third of all, we're limited by this payload size. So we need something that is small and lightweight when we put it inside our rocket. but that can expand to create a larger volume when we actually landed on the planet. What could we use? Inflatables. Behold the future of space exploration. Okay, not really, because sadly we can't live inside a beach ball. But let's look at an example that is a bit more realistic. This is the BigElo Expandable Activity Module. This is an actual inflatable structure which is on use in the ISS today. This creates an interior atmosphere, an interior volume of 16 cubic meters for only 1,400 kilograms. That is a reduction of 310%. This is why inflatables are truly the future of space exploration. Not this beach ball, but the real ones. So, they are way, way lighter, but they have still one issue. They're not perfect yet. And their issue is they're too heavy. Huh? I just said that they're very lightweight. Why are they too heavy? Well, that's because they are way stronger than they need to be. And that has everything to do with this number, factor of safety. What is a factor of safety? Does this mean that our inflatable is 4 times as safe as a normal module? No, actually it means the exact opposite of that. It means our inflatable is so unreliable that we have to make it 4 times as strong in order for it to make it safe. 4 times stronger usually also means 4 times the mass. So we use factor of safeties in all constructions. But a factor of safety of 4 is really high. In comparison, the modules I showed you earlier had a factor of safety of 1.4. So we have a long way to go and we can shave off a lot of mass. But how do we do that and why are these inflatables so unreliable? Well, for that, to understand that, we kind of have to look closer at how these inflatables actually work. Basically, they're built up of 3 parts. First, you weave a basket of a really strong fabric, like Vectran, or maybe you're familiar with something else called Kevlar. This is the same, but stronger. After we've woven our basket, which we call the pressure restraint layer, it holds in the forces of our inflatable, then we put inside of it a plastic bag. This is what we call the gas bladder. So that creates an airtight inflatable. And next, we connect those 2 pieces to our rigid core to maintain the shape that we wanted to maintain and to put hatches in for us to exit and enter our base. Okay, our problem lies here, where this pressure restraint layer connects to our rigid core. Why is that? Well, to understand that, we have to kind of look at how these inflatables work. If I inflate my beach ball here, it roughly creates forces in 2 directions. It creates forces in a horizontal direction and a vertical direction. And in our basket that I just talked about, we answer that with horizontal and vertical straps. Now, are these vertical straps which are connected to our rigid core, and that's where our problem lies. They go all around our rigid core and all the way down to the other side of the rigid core. They go from one top to the bottom. Yeah. Now, where does the problem lie? Well, to explain that, Twan and Jochem are going to help me explain it. I don't know if you've ever tried to cut 2 pieces of rope to the exact same length, but it can be pretty difficult. Okay, so what if I give Jochem this short piece and I give Twan this long piece, and they go stand on the spots where they want to. Now, as you see, they're holding these long. If I push on these ropes with the same force, which happens in an inflatable, you can see that Jochem needs to actually put in effort to resist my pushing, while Twan doesn't really have to do anything. In this case, Jochem needs to be 4 times as strong as Twan, and that's where our problem lies. So, how can we solve this? How can we make it so that we don't have this issue? Well, what if instead of using 2 bands, we used 1? You can throw that. Yeah. Okay. And if they held these loosely, you can see that the band is allowed to move. And if I push on it again, you can see that they both have to make an effort to resist this pulling. And this is the core of our innovation today. And I want to give a big thank you to Twan and Jochem. And a round of applause. Now, we don't just do this once, but we can do this around our entire inflatable, creating loops that go up and then down and then up again. And now, we didn't just think of this idea and then make a really nice presentation out of it. We've also built a prototype that showcases this principle, and it is in the lobby right now. So I invite you all, after the presentation, to come check it out. And then hopefully it will validate this idea. Okay, let's get back to Mars. What can we make with this? Well, something like this. Our inflatable habitation module, which will create 342 cubic meters of volume for some weight between 8,000 kilograms and 13,000 kilograms, which is dependent on how well this idea actually works. If we go back to a comparison of our structures that we can make, you can see that we started out with over 300 tons of weight, and we can see that we have almost reduced it tenfold. And this is the reason why inflatables are so important for the future of space exploration. It's because they are so much lighter than normal structures. And mass means everything in space exploration. And that's why we use them all throughout their design. We don't just use them to create one inflatable habitation module. We use multiple of these, and then we just don't just use them for these modules, we also use them to create tunnels between the modules so the astronauts can actually transfer through spaces. And we use them to create our inflatable shield, which will protect us against the final challenge that we're going to tackle, radiation, which our radiation expert, Pam Graham, is going to tell you all about. So give it up for Pam Graham.
Okay, now we know how we are going to fix the problem of the atmosphere and the dust, but we still have radiation. This is radiation coming from space. So we could ask the question, if it's coming from space, and we're safe here on Earth, then why is Mars a problem? Well, here on Earth we have a magnetic field and a thick atmosphere, and these make sure that the radiation doesn't reach the surface. Mars doesn't have either, so a big part of the radiation does reach the surface. That's why we need artificial shielding for our astronauts. And now there's 3 main groups of space radiation. Firstly, we have the galactic cosmic rays. These are particles coming from very far away in space, from, for example, exploding stars, and they rain down in a constant stream on Mars. They're mainly protons, alpha particles, and heavy ions. And to compare it, they cause 100 times more radiation than what we get here on Earth. That's similar to taking 6 or 7 chest X-rays every single day that you are on Mars. That's a lot of radiation. And the second group are the solar particle events. That's when the sun spits out a whole lot of particles, and sometimes they reach Mars. Now, luckily, these events don't last very long and they don't happen very often, but they are super intense. There are also protons, alphas, and heavy ions, and you could compare it to having maybe hundreds or even thousands of chest X-rays in a couple of hours or a couple of days. And the last group, this one's kind of tricky, is secondary radiation. This happens when radiation moves through matter, and you can think matter as the atmosphere or our shield. And when these particles collide, new particles are ejected. These new particles can be, for example, neutrons, electrons, and gammas. So this is radiation we need to deal with, but it's not directly coming from space. And I've been telling you radiation is bad. Well, why is it bad for us? When the radiation moves through our bodies, it damages our cells and our DNA, and that can cause cancer. We want to avoid that at all costs for our astronauts. That's why the European Space Agency has set a limit to the amount of radiation that an astronaut can receive. That limit is 1 sievert. Compare it to getting 10,000 chest X-rays in one lifetime. And to stay under that limit, we need to build a shield that protects us well enough. But what do we know is well enough? What's good enough? Well, for that we introduce radiation reduction. That means how much radiation from outside of the shield is stopped by the shield. Of course, we want this number to be as close to 100% as possible, but to give a minimum baseline, if we want to do our mission and make our astronauts remain under the limit set by ESA, we need to have at least 65% reduction of radiation. And just to give a quick note, the most dangerous particles are protons and neutrons. So those are the ones we want to focus on for our shield. Okay, so we want to build a shield to protect our astronauts. Easier said than done. There's quite a lot of challenges that we get. Firstly, of course, the shield needs to be able to stop the radiation coming from space. That's its main function. But also, we want to apply ISRU. That means in situ resource utilization. Very difficult term, meaning that we use the materials that are already on Mars, so we don't need to transport them ourselves. That saves weight and thus money. We also want the habitat to be able to stand on its own. Since we have inflatables, we want the shield to be able to not lean on the interior habitat. Then we need to know that on Mars, in the night, it can get as cold as minus 100 degrees Celsius, and in the day, it can get a pleasant plus 20 degrees. That's a very big difference in temperature, and so we need to protect our astronauts and our materials from this. The sun not only emits heat, but also UV rays, and these UV rays are very damaging for plastics. Now, we have quite some plastics in our base and in our shield, so the shield needs to be able to reflect these UV rays. Then, as Mark said, our shield is an inflatable, so it needs a strong layer to hold the inflation pressure, and it needs to have flexible materials so we can pack it up tightly when we transport it. And lastly, Mark talked about the dust, which is toxic, but also abrasive, and that means that it can scratch our materials and damage them. So we need a strong outer layer to avoid that. Okay, a lot of problems, but we're not here to talk about problems. We're here to talk about solutions. And our solution is this: ice. Why is ice such a good material for shielding on Mars? Well, first of all, we know for a fact that water ice is present on Mars. That means we can apply ISRU. We also know from here on Earth that we can use ice to build. Think of how we build igloos. Furthermore, we can even reinforce it the same way that we reinforce concrete. Now, ice is also an ideal material to shield against protons because ice has a lot of hydrogen. And a hydrogen atom is the same size as a proton, and that makes it very effective at shielding. And lastly but not least, the secondary radiation that we talked about. Well, ice is really good at producing less secondary radiation than, for example, metals. And that is why ice is our ideal solution. Okay, so we're going to fill up our inflatable with ice. What will that look like? Well, something like this. We will get a very big dome of ice around our interior habitat. We will have an outer inflatable layer. We will have an inner inflatable layer and a layer of Mars atmosphere between the habitat and our shield. But so far, we haven't solved all our problems yet. We've only solved a part of the problems. That is why we need to solve part of the problems with our inflatable itself and the layers we add to it. That looks like this. It's quite a lot of layers, and they all have a function, so I will quickly go through them. First, we have beta cloth. This will be on the outside of our inflatable. This is a very strong material used in, for example, spacesuits, and this will stop the dust from abrading the rest of our shield. Then we have MLI, or multi-layer insulation. This is the shiny material that you sometimes see on spacecraft, and this will mainly reflect our UV rays. Then we have polystyrene. Think of styrofoam, and then we use a flexible version of this to create a temperature buffer for the shield and the astronauts. Then we have Vectron. That's one of the strong materials that Mark talked about before. This will hold our inflation pressure. And then we have HDPE, another difficult term, high-density polyethylene, simply said, a plastic bag. And we want to use this plastic bag to contain our ice. Then, of course, our main material, the ice, this will shield the radiation. It's very important. And then lastly, we have this, BN. We will use a composite of BN, or boron nitride. And why is this so important? Boron nitride is one of the only known materials to really absorb neutrons. And as I said, neutrons are very dangerous. So that is why we definitely need this. Okay, so we have our shield. That's really good, and I can tell you that it works, but how do we know that it works? Well, for that, we did simulations. And as you can see, we simulated how the particles move through the atmosphere and the shield, and then we could do measurements with that. From those measurements, we got results. And what did these results say? Well, firstly, they said that having multiple thinner layers of boron nitride is a lot more effective than having one thick layer. That's why you saw in the previous slide that we had 3 layers of boron nitride. We also saw that the shield reduces both the particles, so the amount of particles, and the danger of the particles. This means that on the inner side of the shield, there will be less particles than on the outside of the shield, but also that the fraction of protons and neutrons on the inside will be less than on the outside. And then our most important result. We noticed that we need an ice wall of 145 centimeters thick. That's this much ice. That's a lot of ice. But how did we get to that number? Well, then we go back to the reduction rate that we talked about. We said that we needed at least 65% reduction rate. That's the lower line that you see here. However, that's our minimum. That means that there is no margin for error, and we cannot leave our habitat even one day during our mission. That is why we raised this limit, and we raise it to 90%. At a 90% reduction rate, we have margin for solar particle events to occur, but also an astronaut can spend a full year on the surface of Mars without any shielding. And if they stay inside the habitat for the rest of their mission, they will still remain under that limit of ESA. And as you can see, 90% happens when the ice is approximately 145 centimeters thick. Okay, so we've solved our problems of shielding ourselves against the elements of Mars. We can survive, or we can at least not die on Mars. But how do we survive on Mars? That's what our life support engineer, Sanne, is going to tell you. Give it up.
Thanks. All right, so we've made the journey to Mars, our structure is ready, and we are protected from radiation. But how do we provide our crew with their basic human needs once we get there? This is where life support comes in. Life support comprises all the systems and technology required to provide our humans with their basic human needs. So what does a human biologically need to survive Mars? Well, it's actually pretty simple. It's the same as we need here on Earth. We need to eat food, we have to drink water, we have to be in a comfortable atmosphere with air that we can breathe, and we need to prevent our waste from contaminating the Martian environment. So on Earth, nature handles all of this for us for free. Our breathable atmosphere is the result of many complex natural processes. But take our water cycle, for example. Water evaporates from the seas and condenses into clouds. These clouds move to land where it rains, it rains its water upon us, which we can collect to drink. But on Mars, Mars is a desolate, freezing planet on which nothing can grow. So we have to build our own miniature ecosystem. This brings me to my work of the past year, a bioregenerative life support system, or BLSS. Think of it as a closed-loop system in which biological components, like plants, microbes, and algae, take care of recycling our resources. So why is a BLSS so absolutely vital for our Mars mission? Every kilo that we have to bring from Earth costs an astronomical amount of money. Additionally, The trip to Mars takes about 7 to 9 months, which is a really long time. And what if a rocket explodes on the way there? What if it never makes it to our planet, or not even from the launch pad? That will be a great waste of money, of resources, and most of all, of the lives of our astronauts. So, how do we handle life support on the International Space Station, you might ask? On the International Space Station, we rely on so-called physical-chemical systems. These systems are based on mechanical or chemical processes, and they work well on the International Space Station, but they are not yet 100% efficient. And also, they suffer from some problems. Take, for example, our oxygen assembly. Its parts degrade, so we need a constant resupply of new parts from Earth. Our carbon dioxide removal assembly suffers from mechanical failures, which requires a lot of the crew's time to get it fixed. And the water removal system, or recovery system, suffers from chemical buildup, and therefore the system needs to be frequently shut down so the crew can remove it. This is okay on the International Space Station, which is only 300 kilometers away, and it takes usually a couple of weeks to get new supplies there. But if this happens on Mars, if a critical part fails, there won't be a new part in time. By that time, our crew will already be dead. So, I want to propose to you a unique system architecture for our life support system. We will first have an air system, which will take care of providing our astronauts with a breathable atmosphere and providing them with oxygen. We will then have a water system, which will collect and process our water to make it drinkable again. We will have a food system, which will provide our crew with their daily nutritional requirements. We will have a medical system, which will provide our crew with medical support. We will have a waste collection system, which collects our waste and processes it into something useful. And we will have a renewable system, which will take care of the management of local resources that we can use from Mars. But before I jump into which system we are going to design this year, I want to quickly show you how to design a system like this, because this is a massive job. First, you have to think about, okay, what do I want to build? In our case, this is a life support system. You then have to think of requirements that are necessary for building this system. And you then have to allocate your functions to subsystems. Then you have to build components which can fulfill these functions. This is the decomposition phase, in which you can deconstruct your, what you want to build into something that is way more manageable. When you have verified the workings of a single component, you can start by putting it back together and to form a subsystem. Does it work as a subsystem? Then connect it to another one and see if that works. And that way, you work your way up until you come back to an entire full life support system. As you can see, this is an incredibly time-consuming and complex thing to do. So that is why we focused on the most critical subsystem of them all, food. And you might think, why food? Well, most of our nutritional requirements will be fulfilled by plants. And plants are really cool. They can fulfill 3 massive jobs simultaneously. They can absorb the carbon dioxide that we exhale and turn it into oxygen. They can absorb our wastewater as well and transpire it through their leaves and turn it into water that we can collect and drink. Our waste can be used for nutrients for the plants, and in turn, it gives us food, the most important job that it takes care of. Therefore, we need a greenhouse. We need a greenhouse on Mars. And it needs to be the best greenhouse in the entire solar system. It needs to be the most lightweight greenhouse we've ever built, the most efficient one, and on top of all, the most reliable one. I want to take you through the efficiency part, which is what we focused on. First, resource efficiency. How do you make sure that your system uses as little water and as little resources as possible? That's why we use hydroponics, a quite new but proven technique in which plants are grown in a nutrient solution rather than in soil. As you can see, there are many different types of hydroponics systems, but we will use two in our base. Nutrient film technique, in which a small flow of water is passed by the roots of their plants by flowing it through a narrow channel. And deep water culture, in which the roots are directly suspended in the water. So hydroponics has many different advantages. It allows us for complete control of the amount of nutrients each plant receives, and this in turn leads to faster growth and higher crop yields. Additionally, because there are no roots, it eliminates all soil-related insects, fungi, and bacteria. And on top of that, it has less resource needs than other traditional farming methods. So now we have fixed the resource problem. But how do we make the most use out of the space that we have available to us? Historically, space agriculture research has focused on growing plants in a monoculture. This is the growing of a single species of crops in their own specialized environment. But we are doing research into growing plants in a polyculture, which is the growing of multiple crops in a special environment. This is actually the most efficient way to do farming, also here on Earth, but it's not done here, because it's very labor-intensive when it's time for harvesting. So polyculture has many advantages. It allows the plants to share their nutrients, and it increases yields. And on top of that, it makes the most out of the space that we have available to us. To do physical research into whether polyculture, to compare polyculture and monoculture, we have built an experimental setup in which we compare the growth of growing plants in a monoculture to plants in a polyculture. We are currently in the middle of our trials, and by tracking the growth of the plants, their yield, and their resource consumption, we can determine whether growing plants in a polyculture is indeed as promising in practice as it is on paper. At this point, you might think, this is great for a couple of astronauts on some distant planet, but what does it mean for us here on Earth? Well, by designing for the harsh environment of Mars, we are forced to solve the exact environmental crisis we are facing here on Earth today. Agriculture's footprint is staggering. About 52% of agricultural land is already degraded, which means it's far less productive than it used to be. Then also, 70% of our freshwater use goes to agriculture. That is 70% of all the rain that rains down on our land. 80% of deforestation is caused by agriculture, and agriculture also accounts for 29% of global greenhouse gas emissions. On top of that, agriculture is also linked to 70% of terrestrial biodiversity loss. These numbers are insane. But by engineering a closed-loop greenhouse that recycles every drop of water and builds a thriving microbiome for our plants from scratch, we aren't just prepping for space. We are building the blueprint for sustainable agriculture here on Earth that requires less resources and also demands a smaller footprint in terms of physical space. But there is still a lot of work to do. We first need to conduct way more experiments with our test setup before we can build a research-backed greenhouse. And on top of that, we also have to design our other subsystems, of course. So, we can build the best base in the entire solar system, and we have to lock up a couple of astronauts in it for multiple years in this confined space. So our mission can still fail if the human mind breaks. To explain to you how we handle this human side of our design, I would like to hand the floor to Daphne. So give her a warm welcome. You can do it.
Our Mars mission puts humans in one of the most extreme and challenging environments that their mind can ever face. Isolation, confinement, Next to all the environmental hazards, they all put enormous strain on mental well-being and human performance. In this case, mental health is not a luxury, it is mission critical. For example, chronic stress can affect your cognitive abilities, your decision-making abilities during high-stakes environments, or being enclosed in a small habitat with few people and you cannot get away from them all the time. Even small annoyances can turn into conflicts that will affect how you work well together, and that could risk the mission. Mental health dictates safety and long-term mission success in this case. So over the past year, I have looked into stressors or factors in space that affect well-being in a detrimental way. I've looked into 5 categories: psychological, physical, physiological, human factor, psychosocial, and habitability, finding over 30 stressors. These stressors can cause depression, anxiety, stress, sleep issues, and more. While trying to tackle down these stressors, there's one challenge that is very special to a Mars mission: communication delays. When you send a message from Mars to Earth, it may take up to 20 minutes. So you send a message, it goes for 20 minutes, and 20 minutes back, you may have to wait up to 40 minutes to get a response back. So that means that the astronauts cannot hop on a real-time call with the mission control, with their loved ones, or with a therapist. So we cannot provide them instant human support. Then what do we do? In this case, the habitat must become part of the solution. It has to act as a continuous support, psychological support for the astronauts. And that's what we hope to do this year. So now I will mention some of the minimum requirements that we set for our base. First, we have windows. We wanted to have a viewing platform for our astronauts. Being inside can feel claustrophobic, so we need a way for them to have a connection to the outside world. The ISS astronauts have also mentioned that during their free time, they looked outside of the cupola, the windows of the ISS, and down to Earth. Next, this is pretty intuitive. We have the private quarters. Everyone needs their own space. Everyone needs a place where they can retreat, which can make it their own, and which they can personalize. Next up, we have the exercise area. It is a minimum requirement that astronauts exercise at least 2 hours per day to mitigate the negative effects of microgravity. Exercise is also a powerful psychological tool to reduce stress and elevate positive emotions. We have sound insulation. The constant hum of life system support machinery can become annoying. And also research shows that if there's constant noise exposure, especially if it's very loud, it can elevate your cortisol levels, so your stress hormones. So therefore, especially in the private quarters for sleeping as well, it is essential to have a proper sound insulation in our base. We have the living area. We wanted to provide our astronauts a space where they can interact with each other, where they can get rest, where they can do their hobbies, so that we can reduce monotony and enhance team relationships. And lastly, we wanted to follow a biophilic design approach, so incorporating nature elements into our interior design. This could include living plants, digital imagery of nature scenes, nature sounds and smells. So what we want to do is to create a multisensory environment for our astronauts, so the environment is stimulating as much as possible. Now I want to talk about a specific stressor: circadian rhythm disruption. But what is a circadian rhythm? Circadian rhythms are our internal biological clock. They run under 24-hour cycle, approximately, and they influence our cognition. They regulate our hormones, our metabolism, but they're especially known for regulating our sleep-wake cycles. When this rhythm is disrupted, we might experience poor sleep. We might struggle to stay focused. And this is what we want to avoid for our astronauts, because we want them to stay alert, as a mission can include many critical moments. But how is this relevant in space? Well, on Earth, our circadian rhythms rely mostly on environmental cues, especially light. Light tells our body when to wake up and when to produce melatonin to sleep. Space disrupts this relationship. On Mars, day and night cycles are different. Astronauts are mostly inside. They rely on artificial lighting to tell them which part of day it is. Also, a Martian day is 40 minutes longer than Earth. This might sound little, but this difference adds up and slowly confuses the biological clock of our astronauts. And this might leave them in a situation similar to a constant jet lag, let's say. So what do we do to prevent this? Our primary countermeasure in this case is having a dynamic lighting system. By carefully controlling the light intensity, the spectral composition, and the timing of the light, we can artificially anchor the human master clock. So blue-enriched light in the morning will suppress melatonin production and will help our astronauts to stay alert, while warm light in the evening will encourage melatonin production and will prepare the body for sleep. But designing such a system requires high expertise. Therefore, we will be collaborating with JetLight, a leading aviation lighting technology company, to design such system together. And thanks to them, we can now see how this lighting system will evolve throughout different phases of the mission. Within the first few days of the mission, so our phase arrival, the task is simple: to survive. The priority here is maximum visibility, orientation, and reliability. So there will be no complex lighting schedules. It will be simple white lighting. Then we move on to the weeks of the mission, phase 2, where our focus will shift to regulating biology, so slowly adapting to the Martian cycle. But preparation for this phase begins actually on Earth. Because there are individual differences, we will have to assess each astronaut and how they react under different light conditions. With that information, we can pre-program a baseline and use this lighting system when we arrive on Mars. So the astronauts arrive, they validate the lighting systems on site, and then they activate this baseline program. During these weeks, after this program is activated, they will track their mood, they will track their alertness and sleep quality so that we can improve and update our system further. Next, we have the individuality phase, so months into the mission. While the common areas will continue to be running under the shared schedule, the common lighting schedule, the private quarters and the personal workspaces will be left over to the control of the astronauts. So they will have an app where they can activate evidence-based scenarios, such as the boost mode, so having blue light in the morning if they're feeling a bit more tired that day, and if they're struggling to focus on their work, they can activate this special scenario. Or they can activate the recovery mode, a warmer light when they're feeling ill or when they're feeling tired. In this phase, they can also print their own lamps to customize their experience further. Finally, this is more of a longer-term goal. We have the optimization and advanced hybrid systems phase. Here we want to combine our dynamic lighting system with different features, so smells and sounds, so that we can create multisensory environments. This could include theme spaces such as seasonal rooms, or we can add sky panels. So the goal here is to transform bland corridors into engaging environments so that our habitat feels less repetitive and more emotionally restorative. In conclusion, mental health is a part of the mission. By designing our habitat in a smart way, we can help our astronauts think clearly, sleep well, and stay motivated. So by designing our habitat system, habitat as an active support system, we can ensure that our crew remains healthy, resilient, and fully operational throughout our mission. Now that we all have talked about what we have done this year, I would like to welcome Martin back to the stage to tell you about the next steps for our project.
Thank you. Our next step. Before we launch into a rocket and we bring our base to Mars, we are going to improve our designs up until this point. We are going to add more prototypes, build more test setups, and validate our ideas. As well as that, we are going to improve or tackle the issue of power, and we're going to add subsystems to our life support. Of course, our year is now at an end. So we're going to wrap everything up into a nice package, and we're going to enter into the competition of architecture and space in Paris, organized by a famous architect, Jacques Rougerie. I want to thank all of our friends, family, and alumni who have supported us throughout the years. I want to especially thank the partners, whom without we could not have done this. I want to thank the people behind the cameras and the people in the back behind the presentation screens. Without you, this presentation wouldn't be here. And it's an honor and a great pleasure to announce to you Space Oasis Delft 3, its entire team. I want to invite you all onto the stage here and give them a warm welcome and a warm applause. All right.
You should be in the middle.
All right. No bad. Thank you all. If you want to have to ask questions to each and one of us, please head into the foyer. There are drinks, there are snacks, and we can answer any questions you have. Thank you very much.